So I'm starting a new series based on a wonderful book entitled How to Speak Unity. You know, it's kind of like Babbel, where you learn to speak Spanish in 3 weeks. You know, so by the end of this series, you will be able to speak unity. You will be fluent in unity. Written by a wonderful minister who has a ministry, I think, in Tampa. The thing is, I've been to her church, and she's one of these just dynamic, charismatic speakers. And she's written this wonderful little book, How to Speak Unity. So, can you read that? No. Well, it's little because I'm going to give you just a little bit of history. So don't go to sleep yet. It's just a little bit of history about unity. And of course, I'm going to go all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans, to the classical age. And in that time, the emperors and the pharaoh and the king, the people worshiped them as a god. They believed that they were divine. And just as today, say in England, if you're addressing the king, you will say, Your Highness. But in the classical age, if you were addressing the monarch, you would say, Divinity, your dinner is ready. You would call them because they were believed to be divine. That's why they built the pyramids, is because they wanted their god to be well cared for in the afterlife so that their god could take care of them from the afterlife. Okay. Then the Middle Ages, the emperor or king became God's anointed. Then the Renaissance, around the 1700s, the classics were rediscovered. They had been lost during the Middle Ages, but they were rediscovered. And then there was the inventing of the printing press in the 1600s, which has been claimed by some people, some historians, to be the most important invention of mankind, is the printing press. The church lost control of truth. Then the Enlightenment, the individual is capable of discovering truth apart from king or church, became the new mantra. The emergence of the democracies, France and the United States, created separation of church and state. And then in the 1800s, the explosion of denomination. So I'm just going to say a few words about that. When Caesar ruled the Roman Empire, the people would make sacrifices to Caesar. In all the major towns, there would be ceremonies worshiping their emperor as divine. But of course, when Christianity took over the Western world, there's only one God, it can't be the emperor. But here you see the Pope crowning whoever that was, Charlemagne or something. Now the king was called God's anointed, the king or the queen. And when Charles is officially crowned, in that ceremony, there will be a part of the ceremony where he will lay bare his chest. And the Archbishop of Canterbury will anoint his forehead and his heart and his hands with sacred oil, because he is God's anointed. That we still have, the countries that have monarchs still have that ceremony. So up until this, the ideas of the Renaissance began to take hold. Up until then, there was no such thing. There wasn't even the idea of the separation of church and state. The church and the state were united. the monarchs were God's anointed. And to obey the traffic laws was a religious obligation. Whatever the laws were, they were a religious obligation. So they discovered the classic, they rediscovered, Ovid and Socrates and Plato, and people began to think, gee, before Christianity, there were some spectacular philosophers and artists and great culture, before Christianity. Who knew? And then with the invention of the printing press, the ideas that they had dug up from the pagans of a long time ago were disseminated. See, the difference between the average heretic and a book that had heretical teachings, the difference is the average heretic, in order to spread their beliefs, they had to get out and talk to people. These people were largely illiterate. And so they were out in the public, and the church would find out about them and torture them until they confessed, and then they would burn them at the stake. And it was, there were, for instance, there was a group, I don't know, the 14s or the 1500s, around in there, called the Cathars, and they were a religious, they were all Catholic, of course. They were very religious, but they believed in reincarnation. But there are no Cathars today because they were suppressed, meaning the Inquisition got a hold of them, and if anybody insisted that that's what they believed, they were burned at the stake. That's the way, So the heresies, I remember when I was a Catholic girl reading about the heresies, they were all gone. Why are they gone? Because the church and the state were one, and people who did not fall in line were eliminated. So, but if you put your heretical beliefs in a book, that book can't be tortured. You can burn the book, but then the printing press will just print more books. And a little book can be, it can be hidden, and then it can be passed from person to person. You don't have to go out on the public square and proclaim whatever your heretical beliefs are. You can pass your heretical beliefs around. And pretty soon, they spread, which led to a period that historians call the Enlightenment, when human beings, began to realize, I don't have to get truth from the church or from the king. I have a mind, just like Plato had a mind, and I can think, and I can read opinions, I can read the Bible, I can figure it out. So with the emergence of democracies, the U.S. Constitution was finalized and ratified by the states in 1790. I know I always think 1776, but 1776 was the Declaration of Independence. We still had to fight the war, and then when we got rid of the British, then we had to fight among ourselves to decide, what our Constitution would be, and that went through some processes before it was finalized in 1790. But so people, up until that point, had the mindset that somebody will tell me what to believe. And if I'm a good person, I will abide by that. If you're a good Christian, you are doing what the church or the state or the church and state together was telling you. But now they were free of that. And it took them like a generation for that to sink in and be activated. And once it was activated, then there was an explosion of Christian denominations. So I looked up on Wikipedia, which of course is not the final word. And I'm not encouraging anybody to do research or depend on anything from Wikipedia. But I do it all the time, so I'm just telling you. So I looked up, and just for fun, and I don't have any justification for doing this, I printed out for you a list of Christian denominations. Are you ready for this? And look at the print. You can't read that print. Don't. You're welcome to come and look at it after the service. But it's too small to print. And then after I had printed this all out and taped it all together and rolled it all up, I sat down at my computer and discovered that I had missed 2 pages. So it's actually 2 pages longer than this, of all the Christian denominations. Wow. And most of this, not all of it, but most of this happened in the 1800s. Okay, that's just for fun. You can look at it later. So, the best known, all the main denominations, other than like the Lutherans, who started, with Luther way back in the 1600s, like New Thought, we are part of the New Thought group of churches. The Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Seventh-day Adventists, they all started in the 1800s, in the early 1800s. So now we move on to New Thought. They trace it back to, you've heard of being mesmerized. Well, there was a guy named Franz Anton Mesmer who used hypnotism to heal people. And it kind of kicked off this movement of what came to be known as mind healing. Because medicine was in sad shape at that time. If you were sick, they were still making a poultice out of cow dung and applying it, or leeching and just god-awful stuff that made people sicker than if they had no medical treatment at all. And so people were desperate when they were sick. So this idea of mind healing really caught on. Okay, so kind of put that aside. Another very famous name that you'll run into when you study the history of New Thought is Thomas Troward. He was an administrative judge for the English Empire at that time, and he was stationed in India. And his hobby sort of was comparative religion. So he studied the religions of India, he studied Buddhism, he studied a bunch of different religions, and he kind of came to the conclusion that there was like a golden thread of truth that ran through all religions. And he wrote a series of lectures that were collected in a book that you can, which I have, which you can get, and I recommend, called the Edinburgh Papers. So that was Thomas Troward.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
One more time.
Siri, I'm sorry. Did you get that? Okay, so Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. You've probably never heard of him unless you have studied the history of unity. He was a clockmaker, but he heard about this mental cure business, and he cured himself with his thinking. And he developed a system that worked, and he became a healer. And he just healed people the rest of his life. They started calling him Dr. Quimby because he was just so effective. And he would just sit people down, he would talk to them, He would explain to them how to think, and people would, the lame would walk and the blind would see. He was amazing. One of the people that he healed, who became like a personal secretary to him and a devoted follower, was this name you have heard of, Mary Baker Eddy. Now, she was the one who combined mental healing or the mind cure with Christianity. So after Quimby died, she kind of went off on her own, and she studied the Bible, and she put the teachings in the Bible together with mind healing, and she founded the Church of Christian Science. And, they have what's called the Christian Science Monitor, which is a newspaper that she started. And the first editor was Emma Curtis Hopkins. She may not have been the first editor, but she was one of the first editors of the Christian Science Monitor. But Emma Curtis Hopkins was a brilliant woman, very well educated, and she had kind of some of her own slants on things. And when she would put that like in the editorials, Mary Baker Eddy would not stand for that. Mary Baker Eddy only wanted her specific, exact beliefs and quotes from her book, which I think is Science and Health. The Christian Science book, is it Science and Health? Anyway. And so Mary Baker Eddy not only fired her, she put her out of the church. It's like, there's no opinions allowed. We will tell you what to think. So Emma Curtis Hopkins opened a school to teach what she believed was the New Thought way to think. And her students included the Fillmores. This is where Charles and Myrtle Fillmore learned New Thought. And you know that kind of like our primer, our Unity 101 text is Lessons in Truth by H. Emily Cady. She was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, now called Centers for Spiritual Living, was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins. And Nona Brooks, who started Divine Science, which really was primarily a university for New Thought. But they did graduate ministers, and one of the ministers they graduated was Emmett Fox. Now, both Ernest Holmes and Emmett Fox are wonderful writers. I highly recommend their books. They're the kind of books where you get it. It just flows. It's not you don't have to stop and think. If you read Charles Fillmore, you're going to be stopping and thinking. It's an amazing to me that he created such a successful movement, because to me his writing is like, I can get maybe 2/3 of it if I really stop and think. But Holmes and Emmett Fox, they just flow. It's you reading it and you're thinking, wow, this makes so much sense. I'm so inspired. I'm going to go live like this. You can't help yourself. Okay, so there you go. 1,600 years in a dozen slides. Not too bad, right? You're all still awake. Okay, enough history. Here's a question. Is New Thought new? No. New Thought is a modern way of thinking about the timeless teachings of the mystics. If you go around to any religion, all the religions around the world, not just the Christian denominations, and you kind of, if you could be a fly on the wall, and you just peek in and see what they're doing. At that level, they're doing a lot of different things. They don't look anything alike. But every major religion has produced mystics. And most of them were founded by mystics. Buddha was certainly a mystic. Nanak, the founder of the Sufis, I'm going in clockwise here. Lao Tzu, the founder of the Tao, the Way. Jesus, of course, was mystic. Sri Aurobindo is a modern mystic in the Hindu tradition. Moses was certainly a mystic. You know, he was talking to a bush. And the bush said, I am the God of Abraham, and I want you to go to the people and, you know, do this and that. And Moses said, well, who should I say is sending me? And the bush said, I am that I am. Tell the people that I am sent you. Now that right there, tell the people that I am sent you. Moses had to be a mystic. You know, that's mystic stuff, absolutely. So we believe that Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were modern mystics. They were both raised as Christians. They were both raised as Methodists. Myrtle was a regular church attender. Charles, when he met Myrtle, was not. Charles was a drinker when he met Myrtle, but she would not correspond with him until he stopped drinking. So he stopped drinking because of Myrtle. And she got active in the Prohibition movement, and he joined in, you know, and he used to give talks. You know, before they discovered New Thought, he was out giving talks to get young men to take the pledge to promise not to drink until they were 21, you know. So, anyway, Myrtle, her real name was Catherine Page, and her father had founded the town of Page, Ohio, where she was born and raised, and was very active in the church. And in that Methodist church, the tradition was that when people became young teenagers or young adults, they would decide to be baptized. You know, it wasn't automatic. You reached a certain age where you made this decision. And she wouldn't do it. You know, here her father was the pillar of the community and, you know, helped to build the church in Pagetown. And the reason she would not become a full-fledged Methodist, although she was very kind and sweet, and she was very bright, and she got along with people, but she never took that step because she did not believe in hell. That's the kind of person she was. But the only point I'm trying to make is that all of the people in the early New Thought movement were raised in Christian homes, in a Christian community, and with the Bible sitting on the dining room or the kitchen table, and may have been the only book in the house. You know, everybody had the family Bible, and everybody read the Bible. That was what your religion consisted of, is reading and studying the Bible. So we certainly came out of Christianity. But there is a question that comes up: is Unity a Christian church? And arguments can be made in both sides. On the yes side, our co-founders and early writers were born and raised Christians. We follow the teachings of Jesus. We use and revere the Christian Bible. we use Christian terminology. But the people who, and this is not us usually, it's people looking in on us and saying, well, they're not Christian. And the reason they say that is we teach error and not sin. We all make mistakes. The consequences of our errors, we suffer. If you make a mistake, you're going to suffer. You know, it's like I was getting ready for company yesterday, and I decided that I would just take out the last little bit of trash before they got there. And just as I was walking out the door with a bag full of trash, they drove down the driveway. And I didn't want to greet them with a bag of trash in my hand. So I took it around the corner. We have a wraparound veranda, so I took it around the corner out of sight, and I just put it down. But then I forgot about it. See, that's a mistake where I live, because we live kind of in the country. And when I let the dogs out late that night, like around 10 o'clock that night, I discovered that something, stray cats, raccoon, possum, I don't know what it was, had found that bag of garbage and distributed it all around the veranda. I got up this morning and there were eggshells on my front steps. So I made a mistake, and I'm going to suffer for that mistake. I'm going to have to clean that mess up when I get home. And if my husband walks the dogs in the meantime, then he might mention it to me, you know. So I'm going to suffer for my mistake. And when you make a mistake, you know, what traditionally might have been called a sin, we say, you have done something that is not for your highest good. You have done something that is detrimental to your physical and or mental and or spiritual well-being. And we don't want you to do that. We want to teach you not to do that. So that's our teaching instead of hell. And we also teach reincarnation, and we teach the divinity within everyone instead of original sin. We think original innocence. And we teach mind power, that God, when God individualized itself as each person, you know, the nature of God's love is, I love this phrase, unconditional self-giving. So when God, you know, there wasn't anything but God. So when God makes human beings, there isn't anything to make them out of. God makes us out of itself. We are extensions of God. And being unconditional self-giving, God is very uncomprehensibly generous. And therefore, we are co-creators. God is a creator. He gave us that power. And we have the power to create our lives. So, that's what makes, all that I just said, that's on the blue side, that's all what makes us a bunch of heretics. Okay, so going back to the Christian terminology that we use. For instance, in traditional churches, to say Jesus or the Christ or Jesus Christ, they're talking about God. That's their God. That's what they call God. For us, it's a little bit different. If we use the term Jesus, we are talking about the historical Jesus. When we use the term the Christ, we're talking about and this is a quote from Fillmore, the man that God created, the perfect idea man, and is the real self of all men. And when we say Jesus Christ, we mean the Christ self brought forth into perfect expression and manifestation. And I'm just going to go over those three terms just a minute. About, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago, books began to be published about the historical Jesus. What do they mean by the historical Jesus? What they mean by that is, if historians study Jesus the same way that they studied Julius Caesar, if they study Jesus the same way that they study Hitler, or Winston Churchill, or Abraham Lincoln, just as a historical figure, let's find out who this person was, what they did, what they thought, what they taught, what was their effect on their world at the time, and what is their continuing influence of their lives. So there's this movement is we're not studying Jesus as Catholics or Lutherans, we're studying him as historians. So in our movement, when we say Jesus, we mean the historical Jesus, the man from Nazareth. When we say the Christ, we mean the perfect idea of humanity, the cosmic human being. Now, I've created one of my famous diagrams for you. We all know what a circle is, right? It has a center, and the circumference is equally distant from the center all around. We know what it is. But now you may want to argue with me, but save your argument for a second. Give me a chance to defend this statement. You have never actually seen a circle. If you saw a round thing on a piece of paper, if you magnify that paper with the circle on it under a magnifying glass, what you will see is that the paper is made of fibers. And the ink or the carbon from the pencil is just going to be blobs on these fibers. It's not going to be a straight line if you look at it under the microscope. It's not going to be a line. It's just going to be a place on the fibers that has either globs of paint or carbon on it. And even if you looked at the curve of a circle under a even stronger microscope and saw the molecules that the surface was made of, that there's nothing straight there either, because molecules are kind of lumpy. But we all know what a circle is. We all have the idea of a circle, and we need that. If we didn't have the idea of a circle, we wouldn't have civilization. We wouldn't have wheels. We wouldn't have geometry. We couldn't make civilization work without the concept of a circle, even though you've never actually really seen anything that was a circle. So, the Christ then is God's perfect idea of a human being, the cosmic human being. And when we talk about Jesus Christ, we mean the Christ self brought forth into perfect expression and manifestation. So even though you've never seen an actual circle, there has been at least one human being who achieved the perfection that God had in mind for human beings. The divine idea of a human being. So I put this in my words, not Charles Fillmore's words, that the man Jesus who expressed and manifested perfect Christhood, that's what we are referring to when we say Jesus Christ. Now, was Jesus the only person in history to achieve this? that's beyond my pay grade to say that. But, I certainly wouldn't argue with anyone who had another great mystic that they think achieved it. Like, did the Buddha achieve it? He said he did. Or, any of the other great mystics. So, Jesus, the Christ, and Jesus Christ, those are three terms that in unity we have a specific meaning for them, that you have to learn those meanings if you're going to really understand the wonderful books that we have, like H. Emily Cady and the writings of Charles Fillmore. Now, therefore, Temple Hayes wrote this book called How to Speak Unity, so that the specific meanings for words that we mean in our writings and teachings would be made clear. And it's a little book, and it's very easy reading. Now, it has about 100 words in it that it defines, words or phrases, and they're all common terms that you will hear on Sunday morning in churches across the world. Atonement, evil, prayer, death, heaven, hell, Savior, soul, devil. If I talk on any of these topics, and I do, and across the way there's a big Methodist church, and they're talking and using these terms as well, and they're saying something totally different. So we're going to go over all of these, and I don't know how long it's going to take. I think it'll take us about 6 weeks. Now, the book is available. I will have it here for you next Sunday, and I am asking for you to pay $9 for it, because that's about what it costs me. However, from Amazon, you can download it on your Kindle. How many of you have Kindle? Yeah, a lot of you. Okay, you can download that and start reading it today, this afternoon, for only $8.49. And or you can order it from Amazon as a used book for only $6.39. I can't do that because when you order a used book from Amazon, you can only order one. So I've got some coming for us for next week. All right. So, but putting things into today's language, language changes. When Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were writing, gay meant cheerful. That's all it meant. There's lots of words that change their meaning. So putting things into today's vernacular is very important. And so not everything that we produce you need to learn to speak unity in order to understand it. Ernest Holmes was asked to say, well, what are your teachings in a nutshell? And he wrote a little essay, which I'm going to share with you, called What We Believe. And it's in modern vernacular. It doesn't have any words in it with meanings that might be confusing. So I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to give it to you, but I didn't pass it out. I'm going to read it to you first. This is Ernest Holmes' What We Believe. We believe in God, the living Spirit Almighty, one indestructible, absolute, and self-existent cause. This one manifests itself in and through all creation, but is not absorbed by its creation. The manifest universe is the body of God. It is the logical and necessary outcome of the infinite self-knowingness of God. We believe in the individualization of the Spirit in us, and that all people are individualizations of the one Spirit. We believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul, forever and ever expanding. We believe that heaven is within us, and that we experience it to the degree that we become conscious of it. We believe in the ultimate goal of every life to be complete freedom from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. We believe in the unity of life, and that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. We believe that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence. We believe in the direct revelation of truth through our intuitive and spiritual nature, and that anyone may become a revealer of truth who lives in close contact with the indwelling God. We believe that the universal spirit, which is God, operates through a universal mind, which is the law of God, and that we are surrounded by this creative mind, which receives the direct impress of our thought and action upon it. We believe in the healing of the sick and control of conditions through the power of this mind. We believe in the eternal goodness, the eternal loving kindness, and the eternal givingness of life to all. We believe in our own soul, our own spirit, and our own destiny, for we understand that the life of all is God. Nicely put, huh? That Ernest Holmes, just a wonderful gift to mankind. So, I'm going to give you that. And on the back is Unity's 5 basic principles, also stated in modern language. But to these beliefs, I invite you now, we can end the lesson with Amen, so be it, and so it is.